at worst, I can honestly think of no worse branding or framing you could possibly put on a process where you're trying to achieve peace.
Our top story. Talks have concluded between President Trump and European leaders ahead of the Alaska summit on Friday. President Zelensky of Ukraine says he hopes a ceasefire will be a central theme of the meeting, but maintains something of a realistic outlook. Here he is speaking through an interpreter.
I told the US president and all our European colleagues that Putin is bluffing. He is trying to push forward along the whole front. And Putin is also bluffing, saying that he doesn't care about the sanctions and that they're not working. In reality, the sanctions are very effective and they're hurting the Russian military economy.
The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Ukraine must be involved in negotiations from here on out.
The American president knows if the United States of America now work towards a peace that keeps Ukrainian and European interests in mind as well, then he can expect our full support and can count on it. We made various things clear for the negotiations. We made it clear that Ukraine has to be at the table if there are any follow-up meetings.
Well, let's go straight to Catherine Philp, World Affairs Editor for The Times. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Callum.
What have we learned then about these calls, about what's been discussed, and I suppose if we've got any sense of the direction these talks on Friday are now going to take?
Well, we've only heard really from one side so far. We've heard from Zelensky and Merz representing the Europeans' perspective on this. And if that is all we have to draw on at this point, it appears to me that no side is any closer together than they were before this conversation, be it Russia and Ukraine, Europe and America, or Trump and Russia.
Right. What is it, as you say, we've heard from the kind of European side. So what is it, based on what they've said? What is fueling that analysis, I guess? What have they said or not said, crucially?
Yeah. So essentially, they've backed Zelensky's asks for this. Now, one of the critical points is the sequencing. Zelensky is very clear that a ceasefire must come before proper negotiations, so before a peace deal. This is the normal sequence in this kind of sequencing in these kind of negotiations. Now, Russia has absolutely ruled that out, and we have not had an indication thus far from the Americans that they would push Putin on that, because I don't think that they believe he will do it. Secondly, Zelensky has said there is no question of Ukraine surrendering the Donbass. So he's talking not only of those areas that are currently occupied by the Russians, but those that are under Ukrainian control, which Moscow has made a pitch for and has said that during these negotiations it would like to, it is seeking to recover. At the same time as these conversations have been going on today, Moscow has reiterated those absolutely maximalist views that its demands of Ukraine have not changed since the day it invaded in 2022. So I think what we see here is Europe trying to provide some succor for Zelensky to show that they are behind him as they go into this, and to send a message to President Trump that Europe is prepared to step up and play its part, but it's not going to just simply fall in with any decision that is made over the heads of Ukraine and Europe.
Just as we're talking, Catherine, we've had this from Sir Keir Starmer on these calls. It's just arrived, this kind of readout, which I have to say is not particularly detailed, but in it he does say that there is a viable chance of reaching a ceasefire in the Ukraine war, that now exists because of US President Donald Trump's work, but Britain stands ready to increase pressure on Russia if necessary. Can I ask for your immediate take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's consistent with Starmer's traditional handling of Trump, and indeed that of most of Europe now, which is very softly, don't scare the horses, don't, give, as Zelensky has done, give him credit for starting this process, pump up his ego as a peacemaker, try and persuade him that he can indeed make some peace, and then cross your fingers and hope for the best.
Yeah. French President Macron said US President Trump is seeking a ceasefire when he meets his Russian counterpart in Alaska on Friday. My immediate thought when I heard Macron say that, Catherine, and do keep me right, is, well, sure, President Trump might say that today, but it all might change, I suppose, when he sits in the room.
Absolutely, and this is the problem. I mean, I think, Callum, we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Trump has this, he's very susceptible to Putin in particular, his flattery, and has been known to come out with Kremlin talking points immediately after seeing him. But he tends to be susceptible to the arguments of the last person he spoke to, and of course the last person he speaks to before he then comes back to Zelensky and the Europeans will be Putin. Now, I think it's interesting that both Starmer and Macron and Merz, they've all clearly been coordinating their messaging here. They're going very hard on this ceasefire. And I think that this is because they do want to see that happen first. And if they can, I think you look at perhaps what you might be able to influence, and yet you're realistic about what you can't. And maybe this is what that they have coalesced around, that they can try and push Trump on. So I reading into what they've said since, I think that's probably what they went hardest on in this conversation.
And just finally, Catherine, leading the Times online just now is an exclusive from David Charter in Washington that the US and Russia have been discussing a West Bank-style occupation of Ukraine as a model for ending the war. Under this scenario, David reports, Russia would have military and economic control of occupied Ukraine under its own governing body, imitating Israel's de facto rule of Palestinian territory seized in 1967. Apparently, the idea was raised weeks ago in discussions between Steve Witkoff, the envoy of the US, and his Russian counterparts. Witkoff is understood to support the idea, which the Americans think would get round barriers in the Ukrainian constitution on ceding territory without holding an all-Ukraine referendum. What do you make of this?
Well, to address it soberly, I would say that at best, it is a recognition of the status quo that has no legal consequences. So it wouldn't require any recognition internationally or within Ukraine of Russia's rule over the occupied territories. It would simply be a reality. Without anything being formalized. At worst, I can honestly think of no worse branding or framing you could possibly put on a process where you're trying to achieve peace than to cite one of the world's most intractable and longest running conflict and occupation. If your goal is peace and to end the bloodshed, the West Bank is not your model.
Catherine, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time this afternoon. It's always good to speak to you. Catherine Philp, World Affairs Editor for The Times.